With the mass shootings that happened over the last weekend, there are some things I want to talk about that have come out and happened since. Which, to be honest, some of these things happen after pretty much every mass shooting. Even with that, they still need to be addressed for some reason. There are also some observations I want to bring up with what has happened as well. Let me start out by saying that what happened in both Texas and Ohio were tragedies. Tragedies that should have never happened in the first place. Nonetheless, they did happen, and as a nation and society, we need to deal with that. Like with all tragedies, there are those looking to exploit what happened for everything it is worth, which of course the left is more than in general trying to do this. The legacy media and far left and leftist media are trying to do it. Politicians are trying to do it as well. Hell, so are celebrities, especially has-beens, thinking what they believe actually matters in the situation. Oh, and we can't leave out the blue check marks from Twitter on the left as well. Because for some reason they think that little badge of Twitter privilege actually means they matter. Plus, they can't let a good opportunity to virtue signal and exploit a tragedy go to waste. As part of their exploiting what happened, even with those not trying to exploit it, there are people looking to assign blame where it does not belong. For some reason they are blind to where it ultimately falls in the end, or they just don't care where it belongs and are looking to place it based on some sort of agenda. Regardless of what anyone wants to claim or believe, the blame for what happened, in the end, it falls solely on those who perpetrated these atrocities. Not anyone or anything else is to blame for what happened. They chose to do what they did. They have their own agency, as in free will, and made the decision to do what they did on their own. No one held a gun to their head or to the head of someone they love in order to force them into doing what they did. They were not forced to do it in some other way either. No one's rhetoric made them do it. Don't get me wrong, on some level it may have had some influence in their decisions, but they made the choices that they did themselves. Even with that fact, there are people trying to place the blame for what happened at President Trump's feet. Right now, we live in a politically and racially charged time, and the left is at fault for this. They are the ones who are feeding the flames of both by pouring gasoline on them. They are the ones whose rhetoric is increasing tensions. They are the ones who have to make everything about race, including the most innocuous things where it is nowhere to be found, in order to push and force their ideological beliefs on the rest of us. Trump calls Baltimore rat-infested, and the left makes his saying it into a dog whistle where the rats are somehow blacks in his statement and they all gotta go. This is when it is factually accurate that Baltimore is rat-infested, not only by the furry four-legged variety, but also those in politics as well. On top of this, Trump called my state, New Hampshire, drug-infested because of how bad the opiate epidemic has hit it. We are talking about a state that has a predominantly white population. So by their logic, with his saying that, all of the whites in my state have got to go according to Trump. That is, if we apply things equally under their standards. But as we all know, they never apply their standards equally, especially since Trump became president. Since before he took office, the legacy media, politicians, outlets like Vox and HuffPo have all tried to paint the president out to be the reincarnate of a certain German that looked like he got a skid-mark mustache from receiving a dirty Sanchez. They have also done the same in regards to his supporters being likened to those who followed that dirty Sanchez dictator. For the easily influenced, their doing this can definitely have an effect on their decisions, which is exactly what we have seen with what happened over the last weekend, with all of the supposed hate crimes being proven hate hoaxes, the Antifa gun-toting firebomber who attacked an ICE facility, and the list goes on and on. Yet they want to blame Trump for the actions of others who are responsible for themselves, even when they are the ones who influenced what happened with their rhetoric. That right there is some twisted left logic at play for sure. But that is the clown world we live in these days. With our living in it, you actually have people trying to blame things like video games and firearms for what happened. To me, having some experience with both, this is nothing but sheer lunacy. There's absolutely no logic or facts to back their being at fault, or to go after them for what happened. The only justifications to do so are solely based on emotion and personal feelings, and emotion should never dictate what a government does, the laws it enacts, or public policy. Video games and firearms, when it comes down to it, are protected by our inalienable rights, or are one that is clearly defined under the Constitution here in the United States. That is a fact people seem to be forgetting right now. One that they need to be reminded of. With video games, the First Amendment definitely applies. They are a published medium. They are a form of expression for all of those involved in their creation. Free expression is one of the fundamental aspects of the inalienable right of free speech. If video games were to become regulated and the pearl-clutching moral superiors decided that games like Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, Battlefield 5, or any other was now illegal, it would go against their right to free speech and expression. I guess they missed that part of the First Amendment where it says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. More likely, though, they just don't care that what they want is unconstitutional. They have definitely proven they do not care about the Constitution when it comes to firearms in the Second Amendment, so why would the First Amendment be any different these days? In regards to firearms in the Second Amendment, right now, we are seeing things that should not be happening with either one. Yet, they are. The Second Amendment is written in clear and concise English. It says, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed." Those calling for gun control these days, aka the left, they try to claim the Second Amendment does not protect the individual's right to own firearms because of the first part about a well-regulated militia being necessary for a free state. They seem to ignore that comma specifically put in after it to separate the right of the people to possess firearms from it. I remember when the left didn't ignore that comma, because years ago they couldn't get away with it. Instead, they actually tried to say the Founding Fathers didn't have a proper grasp of the English language, should have put a semicolon in instead, and would have done so if not for their poor grammar skills. I kid you not on this. I actually had a history teacher in high school who tried to use a textbook that wasn't approved by the department head, which actually made that argument. A textbook that the NEA, a teachers union mind you, approved of. There is a whole story associated with this book, the teacher, myself, the department head, and the assistant principal. One that is beyond the scope of this video. Suffice it to say, when the department head found out the teacher was using this textbook that he rejected the use of, what happened to me for questioning it, and how the assistant principal and her were trying to slip its use past him, let's just say the shit hit the fan and it didn't end well for them. With trying to claim the comma was supposed to be a semicolon and later ignoring it not working, those calling for gun control tried to claim that its protection of the right to possess firearms was intended for muskets only, nothing more. That rifles were never even conceived of, never mind pistols and other assorted firearms back then. This claim of theirs is factually incorrect. There were far more advanced weapons than muskets available back then, not to mention things far more powerful, such as cannons. But for argument's sake, let's ignore that last one. Because with their claims of muskets being the only firearms available, if it were true, we wouldn't have seen the first American Sniper Corps back then. That's right, the US had snipers in the Revolutionary War. They used the Pennsylvania long rifle, or as it is also known by, the Kentucky long rifle. Rifle being the opportune word here. They were rifles. Their barrels had rifling in them to increase accuracy and distance, which it definitely did and changed how wars were fought. The American Army Sniper Corps was known for taking out commissioned officers at great distance for the time, which the British whined about, claiming only the enlisted should be considered fair targets under the rules of war. The fact they did that and were able to do so because of a major technological advancement beyond the musket not only helped to tip the balance of the war, it destroys this argument. But so do things like pepperbox pistols, not to mention a precursor to the Gatling gun, and a host of other firearms that were available back then that were far more advanced than the muskets they claimed the Founding Fathers only intended people to own. Then there is that last part of the Second Amendment, the most inconvenient part of it that they won't even go near and act like it does not exist. The fact that out of all the amendments the Founding Fathers penned, they made it clear that this inalienable right shall not be infringed, period, end of story. The reason why they avoid it is because they have no actual argument against it, never mind any ground to stand on in relation to it. It is why when it is brought up by someone, they still try to ignore it while at the same time trying to appeal to the emotions of others. There is no facts they can provide that counter the highest law of the land in the United States saying this right cannot be infringed on. But their whole argument is based on emotion to begin with, which is why there is this attempt to try to get around the Second Amendment with red flag laws. Because according to these people, these laws are supposedly not unconstitutional. Red flag laws, though, regardless of their violating the Second Amendment itself, also violate at least two additional constitutional amendments, namely the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. With these laws, all it takes is someone, anyone, making a complaint about you supposedly being a threat to yourself or others, and the police show up at your home. There is no due process, you are assumed guilty before innocent, a violation of the Fifth Amendment. You are forced to prove to them after the fact that you are not some pre-crime threat that could possibly, maybe, might, commit a crime involving a firearm in the future. That means the burden of proof is on you to prove your innocence on top of this, in a nation where you are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. One of the very tenets too, and a foundation of our legal system here in the US. Another tenet and foundation of our legal system is the government does not commit illegal searches and seizures, which just so happens to be part of a constitutional amendment as well. As in, we are talking about an inalienable right that the state shall not violate. Red flag laws do just that, though, on this note. You have not had any sort of due process, and on the word of God only knows who, the police have walked into your home, searched it, and seized your legally owned and possessable property. Property that an inalienable right says you can possess, and that your doing so cannot be infringed on by the state. Their doing this under red flag laws is clearly a violation of the Fourth Amendment, as you can see. There is no argument based in fact that can counter that it is. We have a law here with red flag laws that violates 3 constitutional amendments at minimum, and there are people calling for it to be enacted without any consideration for this. But they probably do not care that it does. All they care about is limiting the rights of others, inalienable ones included, and will do so on sheer emotional grounds if necessary. We cannot allow for them to play the emotions game. We have to stand up to it and keep throwing facts back in their faces as they shed their crocodile tears while trying to force their emotional arguments into the conversation, hoping it will guilt us into caving to them. We have to show them that we are not going to allow for them to take our rights away because of their feelings. We have to stand up to them now more than ever. What doesn't help us doing this is when there are people out there who are actually giving them exactly what they want or need right now, which Paul Joseph Watson did with the Texas shooter. I don't believe he did this intentionally, mind you. I just don't think he thought things through or took into account everything with what he said here.
America suffered 2 mass shooting tragedies this past weekend. One was carried out by a right-wing extremist and the other was carried out by a left-wing extremist. The El Paso gunman said the Republican Party was terrible. He also supported universal income, universal healthcare, and was an environmentalist, which are all left-wing positions. However, he did hold far-right extremist views on immigration, and that seems to have been the overriding motive behind the attack. So it is accurate to call him a right-wing extremist.
Every single view of the El Paso shooter was a far-left view, including the racism, but especially the socialism, which, to be honest, he hated all immigration. It just so happens that Hispanics from south of the US border are predominantly those who are coming into the country right now, especially illegally, and that helped to shape his racist views. Unlike a lot of socialists, though, he understands that there are finite resources to go around, that you cannot have everyone and their mother showing up with their hands out looking to get free shit because of this. He just took things well beyond this, to the point of looking at legal immigration and illegals crossing the border and arriving at his racist beliefs as a result of his own biases. That one racist thing does not make him far-right anything. He was on the far left, he is still on the far left, and will always be on it. That is a fact. So as the alt-right isn't remotely right and never will be, no matter what the left says or anyone else for that matter. Yet PJW thinks they are a part of it, as you can see here.
The fact is that we have a huge problem with violent political extremism on both sides. Antifa and white supremacists are 2 sides of the same coin. Both obsessed with identity politics, both racist, and both think that violence is a legitimate means to advance their cause. But only one side not only doesn't disavow extremists, but actively encourages them.
First off, there is no problem with extremism on both sides of the false left-right paradigm. I hate to break it to PJW and the left, but that is strictly a problem of the left, not the right. This is because the alt-right, even though right is in the name, isn't remotely right. Just like the Texas and Ohio nitwits, they are strong believers in socialism. Socialism, Marxist or not, is an ideology of the left. They all want free shit. No one on the actual right does, though. Just because these fringes are racist, but do not agree on which ones are the good ones or which ones are the bad ones, it does not change this fact of being socialists. The fact they are socialists, that puts them squarely on the left ideologically and nowhere near the right. There is no argument that says otherwise. Not only that, violence has always been a tool of the left in the United States going back to the times of slavery, through Jim Crow, and into the civil rights movement in this country. It has always been the right denouncing the violence and putting a stop to it. Now, because this truth is inconvenient for the left, all of a sudden anything that exposes it gets pushed onto the right and they get the blame for it. I don't subscribe to either side of the false left-right paradigm, and my seeing this happen is something I find beyond wrong and needs to be called out, especially if it is someone on the right perpetuating it. Because it is like they are taking a baseball bat and kneecapping themselves with doing it. My doing this does not mean I won't call out someone on the right for selectively ignoring things that do not benefit them, because I will, which is exactly what Paul Joseph Watson did here.
After these mass shootings, one by a right-wing extremist, one by a left-wing extremist, only one side of the political spectrum immediately rushed to exploit the bloodshed to push their agenda. And it wasn't President Trump or his supporters.
PJW is correct in saying Trump and his supporters didn't jump on what happened and try to exploit it. But there were people on the right who did. When you have Republican members of Congress right after the shooting trying to use them to go after video games, that is literally they're trying to exploit those tragedies for political gain, no differently than the left did. So let's be honest here, it was both sides doing it. It just wasn't Trump or his supporters who were involved in it on the right. Beyond these 3 things, I didn't see anything else that needed to be called out in Paul Joseph Watson's video. With how many people watch his content and his video having well over 500,000 views, I felt it necessary to address these parts as part of mine, especially with both having a focus on the shootings. Which is why it is here at the end, not wanting it to be this video's primary focus with what happened. Right now, as a nation, we are dealing with two tragedies that happened one right after the other. We cannot have emotions win over the facts or dictate what must be done to prevent what has happened from happening again. Calmer heads must prevail. Because if they do not, the left will have something they have wanted for a very long time, the stripping away of even more of our rights and a weakening even further of the Constitution's constraints on the government. The better solution, which has been the solution from the start, is to hold those who commit murder responsible for their own actions and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. You make them take personal responsibility for their actions instead of showing people it is everything but them committing these acts, which is exactly what people are doing when they try to blame firearms or video games for atrocities like these. You also don't try to infringe on the rights of law-abiding citizens because you want to blame those things. Not to mention people stopping their politically and socially charged rhetoric designed to label people as white supremacists and Nazis in order to invoke a reaction couldn't hurt either. Because this is what you end up with happening when you don't do these things. We have to get back to doing them and let the facts prevail over feelings and emotion. If we do, we might see less violence being enacted in the name of ideology or personal belief. Just a thought. If you liked this video, depending on where you are watching it, please give it an upvote or thumbs up. If you want to know when new content of mine hits the internet, don't forget to subscribe to one or more of my social media or video accounts listed here. Also, with YouTube, don't forget to ring that bell. You can find all of my video content on both BitChute and YouTube. This may not be the case with other places I upload to, but I will try to minimize this happening. You are always welcome to interact with me at any of these sites on the list, so feel free to do so. If you have anything you want me to cover in a video, when it comes to news or current events, send it right along to me. I will try to do my best to cover it. As always, thank you for watching.